poor?
Well, that is so cliched. I'm not really trying to interfere with the bridge between the rich and the poor, because there's nothing wrong with the rich getting richer, but the poor must come out of poverty. Right? So
well, that's kind of bridging the gap, you know?
That is the equation. It's not a seesaw where one has to go down for the other one to come up. You have to find a way that you encourage the rich to get richer, because in getting richer, they create opportunities for the poor. Opportunity. And of course, if one wants to take advantage of opportunities that are made available, one has to prepare oneself, right, to make the sacrifice, to make the effort, because out of effort will come reward. So it's not a simple up and down situation. It is that you have a target of ensuring that no one is left behind and that there's opportunity for everyone to move up.
Several months later,
Macau Group CEO Anthony Sabga III says government's role is to facilitate business and not be in business. He says this is except in the case of extraordinary need to protect national interest or to avoid economic collapse. Speaking at AmCham's TNT Economic Outlook 2022 forum held virtually today, Mr. Sabga explains.
It is well known that government ownership of private companies has been notorious for low productivity, wasting resources, and distorting competition. Often as a result of unclear objectives, political interference, lack of discipline, poor transparency.
According to Mr. Sabga, government should be a self-proclaimed reluctant shareholder and pledge to manage its ownership commercially. Further, he says,
they should also insist that they seek to sell their holdings as soon as possible to capable private investors for a competitive market value, at a profit or at a minimum loss to the public purse.
According to Mr. Sabga, industries such as banking, rum manufacture and port management are not the natural domain of government. And he advises that ongoing ownership of these businesses is a considerable distraction from the government's material work to ensure the safety, security and health of the nation.
The Minister in the Ministry of Finance says the buy and sell culture of the local private sector, along with a heavy reliance on government contracts, severely limits opportunities for developing a more robust, resilient and diversified economy. This was his response to the CEO of a local conglomerate who is calling on the government to sell their holdings as soon as possible to capable private investors. Joe Brown reports.
TV6 News contacted Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Brian Manning, for a response to comments made by Anthony Sabga III, the Group Chief Executive Officer of the Anthony Sabga Group of Companies, on Wednesday, that government's role is to facilitate business, not to be in business, except in the case of extraordinary need to protect national interest or to avoid economic collapse. Mr. Sabga III made the comments during AmCham TNT's virtual Economic Outlook Forum for 2022. Mr. Manning provided TV6 News with an initial response via telephone.
I understand his position, but what we also need is a private sector that is more forward-thinking, one that is heavily involved in research and development, and also in the industries of the future. They also need to be more export-oriented and also internationally competitive.
Mr. Sabga III, in supporting his point, referenced a statement from the International Lending Organization, which says it has funded over 12,000 development projects via traditional loans, interest-free credits, and grants.
And I'll cite an example. The World Bank concluded that in emerging markets, a banking sector dominated by state-owned firms poses a threat to economic development and stability, as preferential lending and patronage creates market distortions and chases away private competitors.
In a written statement in which he provided additional comments, Minister Manning told TV6 News that where banks are concerned, one has to remember that many of the financial institutions currently under the government's control came from bailing out the private sector. An apparent reference to the government's multi-billion-dollar bailout of the Colonial Life Insurance Company Trinidad Limited, CLICO, and other CL financial assets more than a decade ago. The CLICO Trust Corporation Limited, CLICO Investment Fund, along with First Citizens Bank Limited, are among several wholly owned state enterprises in Trinidad and Tobago that include Unicot, ETEC, CPEP, the Education Facilities Company Limited, Lake Asphalt of Trinidad and Tobago 1978 Limited, and Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited, which has 4 subsidiaries. Mr. Sabga championed a long-standing call from the private sector where such state-owned assets are concerned.
They should also insist that they seek to sell their holdings as soon as possible to capable private investors for a competitive market value, at a profit or at a minimum loss to the public purse.
Minister Manning wrote in a statement to TV6 News that what he called the buy and sell culture of the local private sector, along with a heavy reliance on government contracts, severely limits opportunities for developing a more robust, resilient and diversified economy. The Minister in the Ministry of Finance said he was heartened by the recent collaboration between BP, UE and UTT in the area of carbon capture research, and would implore the larger players in Trinidad and Tobago's economy to do the same so as to create what he says is the future we should all want, one where the people enjoy higher wages and an overall improved quality of life. Minister Manning further said that the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Ministry of Finance stand ready to work with the private sector in achieving these ideals. Jules Brown, TV6 News.
We are the smallest ethnic group in Trinidad.
But the most powerful, almost the most powerful. Smallest but most powerful, huh?
That's not bragging.
And we know it.
But life is good here in Trinidad. Life is very good. But there is a measure of concern in the fact that at one time we used to have a huge middle class, which was a sort of a security in terms of any possible conflict between the haves and the have-not. But now that's eroding and they're getting poorer. So they're starting to get angry.